So today we're going to be talking about automating some of your customer service features. This is a continuation of last week's webinar. So if you did not see it, go out to my YouTube channel at XRM Coaches, youtube.com/XRM Coaches, and pick that one up. And that just kind of gives you some background. So we're just going to continue on with that where that left off. So again, my name is Mitch Milam. I'm a free-range dynamic CRM architect. You can reach me at one of these ways here, whichever suits your boat. And if you got any questions or any follow-up things, just feel free to drop me a line. A little bit of housekeeping here. Everybody is muted, of course. And then if you need to speak up, you can either ask a question in the question box or you can raise your hand. I'll try to keep an eye on everything so I can unmute people. But if you want to talk, just let me know and I'll unmute you and you can ask your question that way. Also, at the end, we'll have a bunch of Q&A, so we can do the same thing there. So again, just put your question in the question box or just raise your hand. So still working on all these things we talked about. So webinars you can always find there. Knowledge bits we have coming up. I've got some modifications coming up to that process that I'm actually going to dive deep into. I'm re-architecting the entire knowledge bit delivery service. So I'm going to do that as a series of kind of live, not really webinars, but like live design sessions so that people can get in on the action, see how things are actually done like that. And then I have some learning plans at free stuff. And then again, working on the books and some other things hopefully will be done in the next few months. So here's what we're talking about today. So the most important thing that we're going to talk about is actually creating a support framework. Now, I'm not really sure that's what you call it. That's what I call it, but that's what we're going to do. Then we're going to talk about case configuration, queue management, case creation and routing rules, working with cases, and then some other technical details and phone integration. So bunch of stuff to talk about today. And again, I would love to hear what you have to say. Can anybody hear me besides Rick is having a problem? Anybody else? Nope. Well, I have audio. Can anybody else hear me? Yes. Okay, Rick, for some reason it's just you. Sorry about that. Always technology. Okay, so let's talk about creating a support framework. So the first thing you have to identify is what is your target audience? Do you deal with internal customers only or external customers only, or do you work with both? So I've had customers that have both. So some of them, they're just servicing their internal users, which you can call customers. A lot of people actually call their users customers these days, or true external customers. So they're actually contacting you for support for a product that you're selling, and you happen to use Dynamics CRM/365 to deliver that support methodology there. Or maybe you have both. So you have one help desk that services both external customers and internal customers, or quite honestly, maybe you have two help desks and one services external, one services internal, and use the same CRM system and just kind of divide it up slightly different depending on the target audience. So again, you need to define what the audience is up front. The next thing you have to do is define your support channels. So do we receive phone calls? Do we do email only? Do we have a website that has either a form or a chat window? Do we monitor social media? So I'm not sure if you've ever done it yourself or seen other people do it, but like AT&T is a perfect example. A lot of times you can actually get better support via tweeting about something wrong with AT&T than you will calling the support desk. And there are a lot of other companies like that. Like I remember one time a few years ago, I was questioning banks. I needed to move bank because I got tired of the big banks, wanted a regional bank. I put out one question, got 2 or 3 answers, and then the next 4 or 5 days, I had like 5 or 6 banks tweeting me saying, "Hey, why don't you come look at us? We have what you're looking for," which I thought was very fascinating. Again, this was probably 7 years ago. So it was actually quite astounding back then that they would actually monitor that kind of thing. Do you use fax? Now, I know this sounds kind of silly that fax is still around, but there are still a lot of companies, a lot of the medical field is still all fax based. So some people still fax in. And then there are some of you that will actually have walk-in clients. So it could be anything from a doctor's office to some kind of repair place where people actually physically walk into your location. So These are all your support channels. Not everyone's going to have all of these. Probably somebody will have some or more of these than others, and it really kind of depends. You could start off simple, maybe just phone and email, add your website in, start monitoring social media, and that is your thing. The others, maybe not, depending on your thing. So the idea here is you need to develop a support channel that suits your customers because that's how they need to reach you. Okay. So the next thing, and this is probably the most important of all of the things we're going to talk about, is defining your processes. So a typical customer service process starts with intake. And again, this could be any manner that we listed on the previous slide. So it could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be a form from the website, etc. Then you actually have the processing or the working of the case, and then the escalation, if that's necessary, if you have such a thing. And then we have resolution and closure. Who can tell me the difference between resolution and closure? Anybody? Okay. Shabana, you have that? Let me unmute you. So what's the difference?
Answer?
Yes, what's the difference between resolution and closure?
Resolution, you provide a solution to it. Closure is at the end of it, you close it.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you. So I actually got that from Visual Studio's or Team Foundation server or services, depending on which one you use. So resolved is when you think you've closed the issue. Closure is when the person who opened the case has told you you've solved the issue. And there's a big difference. And the way the TFS works, you can resolve it, and what it does, depending how you set the rules up, it will throw it back to the case owner or the case creator and have them verify, did you actually do that? Okay, so that's kind of a check and balance to make sure that people are not closing things prematurely. I know we've all had experiences in one situation or the other, one vendor or the other, where they gave you an answer and they closed the case immediately thinking that that was it. And when you had a follow-up question, or maybe it didn't resolve the issue and they had to reopen the case. So that's the difference there. So another very important one, so this would be number 2 on my list, is what is important to your organization as related to customer service. You need to create clear and concise documentation. So this is for everything. You need to create clear and concise procedures, and you need to make sure that the expectations are known to everyone and set in a realistic and life-size manner. Okay? Very, very important. Here's some tips here. Do not design your customer service system in a vacuum. In other words, don't a bunch of people sit in the room and figure this stuff out. Involve the people who actually provide customer service in the definition of what the customer service department does. And the most important, do not make people fit the process. I've worked at several places where we created a process and then made the people fit the process, not the process fit the people. And so what happens is you end up with a situation where people are not happy with their job anymore because the process is not how they work. So they have to mix how they work with how you want them to work. I can't tell you how many places I've seen in addition to that will have people creating procedures for people to do or follow that have never done the job and will never do the job. They just thought they just created stuff that they thought this is how you do it, and they never asked the people who do it. Most of the time, when you ask customer service people or any person how they do the job, you will get a different answer than what your expectation is or was. So again, always keep the people who are using the system involved with the creation of the system. That's the best way to maintain employee satisfaction. And if you hadn't figured it out by now, happy employees mean happy customers. If you have employees who are not happy, what are your customers going to be? Probably not happy too. I know everybody makes a joke about it, but go to Walmart. There's not many happy people that work at Walmart. I don't know why. Just not. Last one is educate your people. Now, I picked this because the little human without a face there, little person without a face, looks like they're overwhelmed there. So when you educate your people, again, make sure they're involved at the beginning. and don't overpower them with information that is irrelevant and make them do things that are totally outside their task base. Okay, so again, educate your people as to how things work, listen to their feedback, and continue on from there. Okay, so that's the planning start of this. Okay, now we get into the actual configuration. So the key with anything within CRM is you need to collect data that is relevant to the situation. So as we talked about last week, probably the four most important things here are priority, subject, origin, and product. This again helps us identify what we're working with, how it got here, and then what is the urgency of the matter. Okay. The next thing you need to do is whatever's on the case entity that you do not need, you need to take off. Or if you don't want to take it off, put it into a tab that you don't need, and then either collapse the tab or hide the tab, whichever it may be. But the idea here is you only want to record and review data that makes sense to the customer service rep. Okay, and again, all these things that we talked about here, these four things are all used by management to determine the success of the customer service department and also your products and things like that. Okay, so again, add fields that you require to match your business, configure the fields and data to match your business. And what I'm saying by that is, like, we go back to the priority, it has a low, normal, and high. Those are really generic and probably have to be modified. Okay, so that's what I mean by configure here. So configure your fields. The subject we'll talk about in a minute. The products are in the product table. It's a lookup. So again, configure the forms to have data that they need to fill out, and only the data they need to fill out. And then your views, put the data that makes sense to them so that they can actually see the stuff, and create multiple views for multiple types of people. So for instance, management versus the frontline support reps. I think, again, the most important thing that we can have on a support case is the subject, and that allows us to actually define at a very granular level what is going on, and we can use this information to track different things within the product that we sell or products that we sell, or maybe our processes are broken, or maybe there's something else we need to work on. Okay, so this is the most important field on that form, in my opinion, strictly because it allows us to actually classify at a very detailed level what the case is about. Oops, sorry. Email templates. So email templates are really and truly, I think, an overlooked part of CRM. It's been there forever, at least since I've been working with it, which is version 3, and it allows you to actually create predefined canned responses to people that can be inserted quickly into an email. And the reason you do this is because you come up with things that happen all the time, and you want to be able to service those things without having to retype them every time. So what you do is you periodically review your cases for things that people have asked for, either procedures or requests for information or an FAQ. You create an email template for each. And then don't forget that once you create something, you have to maintain it. So don't go and create 400 templates and then never look at them again, because sooner or later they'll get stale, they'll get out of date, the information in them is not relevant. If you're in the business of selling something that it gets upgraded, so for instance software or even hardware, you need to make sure that the template is very explicit as to the version of that thing. So, okay, we got a email template for CRM 2011 and one for Dynamics 365 will probably work in 80% of the cases. But then there's a 10, 20, 30% difference in functionality between the two, whether either they don't apply or they were changed between versions, so you have to actually copy that data and put it somewhere else. So don't forget that. Okay, any questions on that so far? Okay, let's talk about queue management. So this is really where we get into a lot of the actual productivity of CRM is actually in the queues. And again, I think it's a very overlooked part of CRM because people just don't understand it, and it's kind of, it's not really hidden, but it can be kind of hidden. So the idea here is you define a queue. A queue is nothing but a bucket. You put a bucket in and you throw things into that bucket. You can make this bucket email enabled, as you see here. So we have an email address called customer service. All of our cases that are created for this organization by an end user when they email us are sent to this address. This address I have defined within Office 365 as something called a shared mailbox. So everybody write that down. Shared mailbox. This is a mailbox that is not exactly associated with the user. And what happens is we're using it in this particular case to actually push data into CRM. So we create it within Office 365. We go create a queue. We enable the email address, and then everything flows into CRM using server-side sync. So that's how that works. So when we actually work with the queues, going back to some of our earlier stuff about processes, we need to worry about what is the normal workflow or work process for a case, as in somebody creates a case, somebody works the case, then do we what is the escalation process if we have one, if we need one? Do we have a check on this? Do we have specific people or specific teams that work on one type of case or the other? Again, what are departments with the functionality areas, the support group, what is the escalation path? All this needs to be documented, and then once it's documented, we can actually create a series of queues within the system that will hold that for everyone. Also, the final note there, do we have one or more inbound support channels for these queues? So in other words, do we have one queue only for email and phone calls go into a different queue, or are they all work together? Just things to consider. So here is a possible queue design here. So we have customer service, then we have product queues kind of below that, then we have sales and registration, because again, we can have an external queue that is not customer support related. So for instance, what if we have registration or other types of sales questions? So we have sales at mycompany.com. I can just send an email into that. It gets routed to a queue that the salespeople monitor, not customer service. Same kind of thing happens. Do we have just pure questions that come in? Or finally, do we have internal only things? So does our customer service department take those and then throw it into a multi-tiered or escalation or management queue depending on the situation? And we'll cover that. We'll do. I'll get into the live site later, and we'll actually go through the stuff. So here's an example here. We have an external facing email address, customer service at mycompany.com, which gets forwarded into the customer service queue, and then somebody looks at it and then routes it manually to a product queue. We can also do this with case routing rules that we'll talk about in a minute. So again, the idea here is we want to have as much happen automatically as possible so that people don't have to do a lot of manual labor. The less manual labor, the faster everything flows, as you can probably imagine. For internal support, let's say we have a standard help desk, and that could be also email enabled, but just use internally. So helpdesk at mycompany.com. Email help desk and say, hey, I've got a problem with my printer. It gets routed to the printer queue, or if it's something you can't handle, maybe tier 1 or escalation, depending on who it is. Because, again, some people get higher level of response. So when the CEO's mouse has stopped working because the battery died, that is an escalation. No matter who says it's not, it's an escalation. When you're working with queues themselves, we have a number of views that are available to us. So not everyone is a member of all queues. So you can actually show people that things that are relevant to them and only to them. This is how you kind of consolidate their work into a bucket that is only concerning them. And we'll do that through the actual queue membership. So we can look at all cases and selected queues, or all queues, all items, cases that are available to work on. So in other words, no one has actually selected a case and saying, I'm going to work on this case. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Cases that I am working on, items available to work on, items that I'm working on. Now, somebody is probably going to think, what is the difference between a case and an item? Can anybody tell me what a difference between a case and item is? Anybody? Jamie says queue items. That is true to a point. Well, what's the exact definition? There you go. Sam forgot. I was about to open his mic and make him talk to us. So a case is a case. A queue item is anything else. Okay, so they've actually just consolidated down to show only cases versus only things that, or everything else pretty much. So cases and everything else, and we'll talk about it in just a second here. So we can also select the queue that we're working on. So at the top, you'll notice the queues that have the less than and the greater sign around them. Those are actually personal queues. So MI Milam 5 is actually the queue for the business unit that we're in, which is the default business unit, which also happens to be the organization name. Then we have my name, which is actually my personal queue. Then we have queues that I've created, such as customer service, loyalty, miscellaneous, and orders. Then we can see all queues, all public queues, and then queues that I'm a member of. Rodrigo says case conforms to a lot of queue items. Yes, in most cases, what you're going to see in a queue is a case, but it doesn't have to be that way. So, which is perfect segue into this slide. So a queue item is just a CRM record that points to another CRM record. Okay. By default, a handful of items within CRM are already queue enabled, and you do that with that checkbox. So this is the case entity, as you can see. It's selected for queues and disabled, which means you cannot change that. But likewise, you can go into other entities, and if the checkbox is available to you, you can change it. And what this means is you can add that type of entity to a queue. So that could include activities. It could include custom entities, maybe some of the sales like leads, maybe we throw those into a queue, things like that. So the idea here is most of the time when you work with queues, it's going to be a case, but not always. And again, it depends on your business. So keep that in mind when you're working on it. So when we have the queue open, what we're seeing again are queue items. Now again, a queue item is nothing but a record that points to another record. When we open up one of these selected records, we're not technically opening up the queue record, or a queue item record. We're opening up the record that is pointing to, which in this case is a case, as you can tell by the little wrench thing there. Okay, so the things that we can do here are route, pick, release, remove, or bulk remove. So route will allow us to actually manually select a queue to place this in. When we pick something, we are truly picking it, saying, I would like to work on this item. So I am making the selection saying, this is mine, and it will assign it to me. Now, I can be the owner, and the owner of the record and the owner of the queue item are two totally different things. So we'll see that in a minute when we get into the live demo stuff. We can release an item that we are working on back into the queue if we can't work on it, or maybe we're putting it into a state where somebody else needs to work on it. We can get queue item details. And finally, the bulk remove works very much like a bulk delete, where it will allow you to define an advanced find type search to actually look for things to remove from the queue depending on what it finds. Okay, so let's talk about case creation rules after we restart PowerPoint. Where were we? There. Start that up. Flip my display. And we're back in business. Okay, why do we automate case creation? Well, we automate case creation because it saves time and energy. Time and energy is the equivalent to money, right? Everybody likes money. People like money. Businesses like money. Businesses make money to pay people. That's really kind of funny, huh? We can greatly increase productivity by doing as much behind the scenes as absolutely possible. So again, this increases productivity and throughput. Okay, so throughput is, how many cases can we create? So you think about it. Right now, you may work in an organization that has a mailbox. They take that mailbox and people look at it several times a day, a minute, an hour, whatever it might be. Take an email out of that, look that person up, create a case manually, and then copy that information from the email into the case. Okay? That's how a lot of people do things. Well, that's a waste of time. We have ways around all of that. So what we do is we create a record creation and update rule. And part of this is it points to a queue, as you can see from the first thing here. Let me turn my highlighter on. Okay, so we have a queue. So this means it's going to monitor this queue and this queue only. The source type is going to be emails, and we can create emails from unknown senders is one. We can check entitlements. We're not talking about entitlements today, but we'll get that in a couple webinars here. We can create case activities for cases that were resolved. If they were resolved in the past day, assign it to that case, otherwise create a new case. And then the really cool thing is we can actually create an autoresponder. So I'm sure everybody has gotten at one point in time, send an email to somebody and they give an email back saying, hey, we got your thing and we're looking at it. So it's not, we're not working on the case. We just want to let you know that we received it. That's the idea. Then over here, we have the rules concerning the record creation. So that allows us to actually figure out, what we're going to do with all this. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to create a case. And we could actually add filtering criteria, so we only create cases for specific things. But in this case, we're not going to. And we could do this if we want to have certain things, if we have certain keywords in maybe the subject or within the body, we could actually create a case and then do something specific with it. But in this case, we're going to, anything that comes into this inbox for customer service, we're going to create a case out of that. Then what happens is we can create routing rules. So why would you do such a thing? Well, again, saves time and energy, prevents items from becoming lost, and hopefully it also increases your productivity and throughput. And again, the big thing with is I think the second item there, things get lost, and that happens a lot in places that have either an overwhelmed customer service department, or maybe they just have too many things. So what happens is things just get lost and they end up just like staying there. So maybe something comes in automatically and it doesn't end up in a queue. It just has an email created. It just sits there. And then 2 weeks later, the customer is mad at you because you never called them back. It's because, well, we didn't know to call them back. So what we do here is we create a case routing rule, and or actually a routing rule. This is applied to cases in this particular thing. And within this, I have several different items within the rules themselves. So I have one rule that is for the customer service queue, one for orders, one for loyalty, and one for miscellaneous. The way it works is I create one for the customer service queue if the subject does not contain data, which means I haven't actually specified anything. What happens with this is the subject has to be manually modified based on the contents of the case. So that means the intake coordinator, which is the first level customer service representative, looks at the case and then figures out, okay, this is what this is about. And then they set the subject, and then the other rules apply. So if we don't have a subject, that means it's a brand new case, just came in via email. We're going to route that to the customer service queue. The intake coordinator actually monitors the customer service queue for new items. Then what happens is they open the case, they look at the case there, and it's like, oh, okay, well, this is an order question, or in this case, we're doing order, so it could be orders or missing or wrong items, the order not received, and again, I got a duplicate there. But the idea here is once we determine that, we can save it and route it, and that will actually put it into a different place. Okay, and we'll get in detail here in just a second on all that. So let's talk about the case stuff. So from the case view, we can do several things. We can resolve it, we can cancel it, we can apply a routing rule, which we just looked at, or we can add it to a queue. From the form, we can save and route. So what this does is, say that scenario I just outlined, I am the customer service intake coordinator. I open this up, I read the email. Oh, you are missing a piece to your order. I'm going to put this into the orders queue or the something like that. And what I'll do is I will save the record and route it, and it will automatically apply the routing rules to that. I can create a child case, which we'll talk about in a moment, about the granularity of your customer service organization. I can resolve it, cancel it, add it to a queue, or again, look at the items, the detail items for the queue. So case granularity. This is part of your procedural definition that we talked about at the very beginning. So what you do with this is we have a case that is called a parent within CRM. You can add multiple child cases related to that. So in this example here, I have a case where CRM is down. Okay, why is it down? Well, I don't know why it's down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a case off to the web guys. Okay, the server's up and running. Everything's fine from our end. Okay, well now now we need to forward it over to the network people. Let's see if there's something on their end. Well, I could forward that case to the network people, or I could create a child case saying, hey, I need network checked on this server. Like, okay, well, we checked the network, everything's fine, we don't have a problem getting to it. Okay, well, that leaves the user. So now let's open a case for the workstation. So we'll send it over to the desktop support group, and they can have a case like that. Again, I could have done all of that within one case, just one case, and just forwarded it around to the different groups. Now, here's why that may not be a good idea. And again, 100% specific to your organization. So when you start tracking the number of cases that you have, it's a way to determine how much you're working. If we have one case that we pass around to, in all honesty, 4 different groups, we don't know that we had 4 different cases looked at. By creating a child case, we can actually state that we created 3 cases, one for each of the different groups within IT support, and each one of those gets quote-unquote credit for the work that they did. Okay, web guys checked the web server, it was fine. Network checked the network, it was fine. And finally we end up, well, if it's not one of those 2 things, it may be the workstation. So it's either going to be short between the floor and the keyboard, or they've got some kind of workstation issue actually going on. Okay, so again, that's what desktop support's for. So anyway, by making them granular like this, it allows one person to kind of be in charge of the case itself, but also have people who do the work actually do the work and get credit for that work. When these child cases are closed, we can close the parent case and everything is done. Okay, again, totally depend on your organization, but this is a way of doing work. What we used to do a long time ago is we would create a case, it would get worked on, and then the customer service rep was more scored on or gold on case closure. So there was nothing to do for them anymore, but we didn't want the case to go away. So what they would do is they would create what we called an admin subcase. And then they would assign that to me. And then I would just check back with the customer every couple of days to make sure it was still working and nothing else had popped up. And they would go ahead and close their case, but I had a secondary case to monitor. And then once I verify that, yes, it's still, everything's fine, because sometimes you have these intermittent issues that could go on for months or weeks and things like that. So what you would do is just go and have it close out their case, and then I would just monitor it because I wasn't gold on that stuff, and it was an admin type case, and it didn't count against anybody's metrics at all, but it also allowed me to not forget about the customer and the issue. So again, that's a thing that you can do if you want to. So some additional technical details here. Let's talk about processes. So let's create a workflow. In Dynamics 365, we can use a thing called an action. And again, an action is a thing that's built into CRM that they have surfaced with Dynamics CRM 2016, the spring release. And then with Dynamics 365, which is the fall release, they've given us more of these things. Well, one of them is the add to queue. And the way we do that is we create a step called action. We select add to queue. The entity is going to be a queue item. And then what we do from there is we specify the destination queue, the target, which is the record, and the source queue, which is optional. Because the way it works is when you route, that's what this is called. When you add to queue, I'm going to take it from this queue to this queue is how it works. So this would be a destination queue. The lookup would be whatever record you're on, and that would actually activate. And when you ran the workflow, it would actually move it into that queue. If you're working on earlier versions, you have to create a queue item. This is exactly the same process. So we specify a queue item. We can specify the worked by if we want to. So this is more or less a picking of a queue. If we want to do that, we don't have to. We do have to specify the queue it's going into, and then a pointer to the item itself, which would be more like a case or main activity or something like that. So between those two, you should be able to figure out which one to do. This also works with Dynamics 365 as well. So if you create this in say 2016 and you're upgrading next month, don't worry about it. It'll still work exactly the same way. Okay, so that's a couple things you can do. Final thing I want to kind of cover, and it's really going to be dependent on your situation, is we do have ISV solutions that allow you to integrate your telephony system, depending on what system you're using, into CRM. So here's some vendors here. I have really no personal experience with any of these. Just these are some that came up in the conversation the other day. MSCRM add-ons is one I've heard about the most in recent years, but these are all ones that that you could see. And the idea here is you have an inbound call. It will take the phone number. It will attempt to look up the record or records that could possibly be a match. It will show you that information and allow you to click it and then open the record up. This saves time for the customer service rep because they don't have to do a manual search. It can automatically create a phone call activity, and it can be used to track statistics later on of here are the number of phone calls that we're getting per day. And again, this is all a management type of thing. Okay? So, in review, what we talked about is creating support framework, configuring the case, queue management, case creation, routing rules, working with cases, and then additional technical stuff and phone integration. So, any questions before we go in and see some of the stuff live? Nope. Okay. Well, let's get out of the PowerPoint and go into CRM. Okay. So let's look at queues here. Let's look at queue definitions first. How about that? So we'll go to service management, settings, service management. And within this is where you find all the stuff that we've been talking about. So we got queues, routing rules, automatic case creation, parent-child case settings, subjects. So look at queues. So again, we're going to see all the queues. So if you have a lot of users, you're going to see a lot of the stuff here. There's a lot of these things. You're going to have to kind of filter it out. So what you can do is just say active queues, or I think I usually create a view that basically filters out the ones with the less than greater than sign. So as you can see, I have one queue that's email enabled, and here's my email address. It doesn't have any items in it. My loyalty queue has one item, miscellaneous has one, and orders has 3. I personally have 11 in mine. Okay, so I'm going to open the customer service queue. And this is a configuration we saw earlier on the slide. If I have live queue items, I would see them here. I can also have membership. So this is a public queue that's visible to all users. Okay, so what is the difference between public and private queues? Can anybody tell me? Nobody? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go make one. Well, you can do it. Oh, sorry, wrong button. I am going to create a new queue called escalation. I'm going to make it private. And I'm going to incoming email is one. Okay, I'm going to save that. Now look, I have membership. So the reason I have membership is because I need people to, I only want certain people to see cases that are in this queue. So only the members would see this theoretically. So I'll tell you what, just to prove that I'm not telling you a story, that's my My family says when I was growing up. I'm going to go to queues, and I'm going to take that one, and I'm going to route it to the escalation queue. And if I looked at escalation, see, queues I'm a member of, how about that? I'll show that there's points checked. It's an escalation queue. If you're not part of this, I don't think you see this. And the idea here is some cases you don't want people to see because of where you're at in the status. Like I had a friend of mine work for a place here in Dallas a few years ago, and they got a new Oracle database server that ran on this ginormous Sun microstations box, and they started having these really weird issues. Well, they got to 9th level support at Sun. And what Larry said was he got this email that literally said, okay, God's going to dial into your box at 10 a.m. You do not talk to God. You do not interact with God. You do not do anything. You let God do what he wants to do through the box. And everybody's like, really? Okay, whatever you want. Well, this person was pretty much probably a developer, and nobody talked to developers because they don't have time for that. And so he didn't have a name. I'm assuming it's a he. He or she did not have a name that anybody would recognize, so they couldn't track him down. And that person's only job was to go in and find and fix very, very hard to determine problems. And I'm sure that that person named God actually had a queue that was all their own, so that they would basically have these things show up. They would give them specifics, and they would go in and work on it. But the idea behind a private queue is it doesn't show up for everybody because not everybody has that level of access or needs that level of access. So that is the idea behind that. So service management, I'll go back to my queue. So again, you can have people that are members of queues. For public queues, everybody sees the information, but for private queues, not everybody sees. And again, here's my items, as you can see here. Somebody is very smart. I bet it was Sanford that did that. Was it Sanford? I bet it was. Okay, let's go look at the case creation rule real quick. So, a couple things. Who can tell me what the case creation rule actually is? Well, besides that, Julie, Auto 1. What is this? This is a definition. What's the definition actually relate to within CRM? Anybody have any ideas? A rule definition? Yeah. What's the rule definition actually do? Let's go look at that. Here's a rule definition. This tells you what to do. Okay, Brad got it. It is a workflow. You can actually go into the processes view, and you can do an advanced find and take off enough criteria where you can actually see these things. Would you guys like to do that? Yes? No? That's a yes. Well, sure. Okay, so here we're going to create a case. So if I go over here, go back to settings, processes. This is just, kind of FYI. Go to advanced find. Details. And I am going to, take that off. Take that off. Oops. And there's Auto 1. Open that up. If dialog conversion scenario equals 1 and dialog allow only primary action block record creation equals 1, then create a case, update the email, send an email using the case template, otherwise update the regarding case. Okay, so that's what happens behind the scenes. Also notice that you cannot edit this. This is done behind the scenes. This is just your FYI. So if you're ever confused, and this has actually happened, the reason I show this is because this has happened to me before, where it created something that was, for lack of a better term, wrong. Something weird happened. I can't remember, and I finally tracked it down to that was actually running a workflow, and there was some weird permission somewhere that basically made it fail. But I had to track it down like this. It took me a couple hours to figure out what the problem was. Okay. The scenario define, Brad, the scenario, I can't even talk today. The scenario is defined in your rule actions. So if you look at this, there it is right there. So it's creating a case. Like I said, there's no condition, but if you had a condition, it would be there as well. And then, as you can see, puts in the subject of the email, the channel properties for customer and contact. I had to change the origin. That was also a channel property, but for some reason it wasn't coming through as email, and I needed it to come through because it was screwing up my stats. So I actually had to modify this and remove the replaceable parameter and specifically put in origin of email, because this automatic case creation only happens on email. So, and then you have the other fields down here. Okay, so there's that. So that's where the definition is. Okay. So let's go back to my queues. Okay, so got a missing order here. So again, I can route this manually. I can pick it. Okay. When I pick this, that means I am going to be working on it. This question here will confuse the heck out of just about everybody that you work with, including yourself. Also remove items from the queue. Remember, a queue item is nothing but a pointer to a real record. What if I remove the item from the queue? What will happen? Anybody know? Okay, Jamie got it. It will not be in the queue view. So it will disappear from the queue system because it is no longer a queue item. It does nothing to the actual item, which is the case in this particular circumstance. So if I want it to remain within the queue system, I would select no here. Otherwise, I change that to yes. So when I pick this, you will see that it is now being worked by me. Okay. I can also release this. So I'm going to put it back into the queue. So either I decided that I'm not qualified to work on this, or I'm done, or whatever it might be. So as you see, it's now being worked on by no one, and I can allow someone else to pick it up. Or I can remove it from the queue. Do you want to remove that? Yes, I do. And again, it's just removing the pointer. If I go back to cases, I can see all of the active cases. And I think it was one of those down there. You see those. Okay. So again, going back to the queues, when I use any of this stuff at the top, the whole thing we're doing here is just maneuvering within the queue system itself. Okay, so I can route manually to a specific queue or user. I can pick it to work on it. I can release it to return it back to the queue. I can remove it from a queue. I can do a bulk remove, and again, this is just a bulk, advanced find. Works just like the bulk delete, pretty much. Okay, now when I have an item open, I have another set of things I can do with this. So I can save and route it. So right now the origin is that. So if I pick the subject and I select that, say it is an issue with order not received. When I save and route this, it's actually going to route it to a new queue, which it is showing me here. Oops. Is that working? Go back to all queues. See, points checked right there. Okay, so what that did is I'm not going to make the user actually make a determination for where it goes into the queue system. I have already made that determination through my routing rules. So the user just literally, so pretend I'm the intake coordinator. As you saw, the subject was not selected. I looked at it, oh, it's an order issue. Okay, well, order not received, it should be the subject. I set that, I click save and route, it saves the record, applies the routing rules to the record, and it gets over to the order queue, and now they can take care of it. Okay. If ever I'm in question about where this lies, I can look at queue item details, and it will see, oh, it's in the orders queue being worked on by Jennifer. Okay? So that's how that works. So what else did I want to do with that? So any questions on the routing or any of that stuff? No? Okay. So again, the main important things here is you define your processes, you create a queue system to match your processes, you educate your people, you create your subjects, you modify your forms to actually make sense to you, to whatever's the best for you, and then you use automatic case creation and routing rules to automatically either create records or route those records within the system. Rob asked, where did I go to see what case it's in? The queue item details on the command bar. Right there is the queue. Like I said, if there was a work by assigned to this, then you would see it right there. So, and again, the ownership of the record and the person working on the record are two different fields. So that's just kind of the way that works. Sanford has a really deep question. How do they make green beer taste so good? Well, Sanford, it would depend on the beer. And it would also depend on how green it is. And it also depends on where you were. So that answers that question for everybody, I hope. Oh, if anybody else has anything to say, then that was good. Rob said that Sanford has not had great beer. Well, that's possible. I don't know. I've been around Sanford. He may have. So anyway, so again, the key to this whole customer service thing is, utilizing the tools you have available. I have done lots of work with CRM in almost 11 and a half years here, whatever it is. And I can guarantee you that 80% of the customers I've worked with, and I couldn't tell you how many that is, do not use customer service because they don't think they need to. Okay. But it could solve a lot of problems for you just because at bare minimum, it helps you keep track of your statistics. Okay. How many phone calls are we getting? How many things are we actually fixing? People use that. When I worked at Microsoft the first time, I actually had, they had a support team that was fired because they weren't filling out their case stuff. And then when it came down to see who was busy or not, oh, well, your team is not busy. So they let them all go. And it wasn't that they weren't busy. They just weren't recording their work. So they literally fired an entire team, manager and all, strictly because they were not recording their data. Okay. And that cost them their jobs. Let's see. If using case for internal, the customer field isn't valid, would you want to use a user entity instead? Can it be changed? Julie, that's a great question. So probably how you would have to do it, there's two ways to get around that. So what she's talking about is this customer field here is going to point to a contact or an account. Okay, so it's the customer data type field is what it is. But we have a user, so how do we get around that? So two ways to do that. We could have another drop down that says case type is internal or external. So if the case type is internal, then we show that field and hide the customer. Okay, so we add a field that points to a user and then put it right below this and then show or hide one based on that. The second thing that we could do if you wanted to is we could create a new case form and show one set of data for the internal and one set of data for the external. That might be more complication than it really worth, quite honestly. I would do that probably second. The other stuff you can do with either JavaScript or a business rule. So that would be the fastest and least costly thing to do is do it like that. So it just takes Adding an extra lookup field, putting it on the form, creating a business rule to show or hide one or the other based on the setting of the case type, and then go from there. But that's a great question. Thank you, Julie. Kurt says, like creating a case when request phone call support. Yes. Oh, Sanford brings up a great one. Okay, so he said he had a situation where the customer added users as contacts. That happens, I guarantee you, in 90+% of all CRM installations. Now, here's the problem with this: CRM does it to itself. So I want you to go and look at this. So that's great. Let's go look at contacts real quick, and I want you to go find my user. So let's look for me. There's about 4 versions of me in this. This is me, the admin. This is the person who is the global administrator for this Dynamic CRM tenant, 365 tenant. And as you can see, I am a contact. I am also a user. Does anybody know how this got in there? Nobody? Email? No. Good guess, Sanford. Does anybody know what this form right here is? Anybody ever heard of the Microsoft portal, the ADX Studio portal? That's what this is. So this is installed on the system here. So if you ever notice when I was clicking here, you would see, oh, there's a portals area. There is. The portal created this when I installed the portal. Okay. Now, here's what the problem is with this, and Sanford has changed with Dynamics 365, I noticed. So in my admin book, if you don't have it, you go pick up a copy. It's kind of cheap, I think. But anyway, this has been the bane of people's existence of CRM since CRM existed. People putting in their users as contacts because they do stuff with them. Sometimes there is really and truly a good justification. I've got one customer and they came up with the most brilliant thing I've heard of in a long time, and I don't get impressed by much. So they have click dimensions. What they're doing is they have an onboarding process for new employees. So they create them as contacts. Then they fire off a campaign and they send them a series of emails as drips to actually show them information about the company. When they get a support call or email about a topic, they go and look at the statistics on that email to that employee to see if they actually looked at it. If they didn't look at it or didn't click on the link, then they call them and say, hey, go read that email that I sent you last week. I'm like, that's brilliant. I need to write an article about that. I just haven't had time. Now, the problem with that is it does solve a very unique and valuable business purpose, in my opinion. It really does. It also creates a very odd set of circumstances. And part of the odd set of circumstances is it will now duplicate emails to the system. So don't duplicate emails. It'll actually refer them to two different people. So what happens is if I send an email to Milam at milam.microsoft.com, I will have that one email associated with two things. This contact and my user. Okay, that may not be a big deal for a lot of companies. Couldn't care less. But what is a big deal is you can accidentally start tracking emails that you don't realize. And 99% of the time, as you know, people don't secure their activities because you can't do record level security within CRM. So what happens is you start tracking internal conversations about somebody, and then that somebody or somebody else sees that by just accidentally being at the right place at the wrong time and seeing an activity what's that mean? And they open it up, and the next thing you know, they see a personal conversation or a managerial conversation. Or maybe somebody sent the VP sent the CEO payroll numbers. And next thing you know, that's in a worksheet that's not protected inside of CRM. Now everybody has access to it. Okay, so there's really not a good solution for it right now. Again, there are genuine business reasons to have your users as contacts, but it does create some very odd side effects that you really have to explore, and everybody's going to be different. And so you have to justify, is this going to be worth the effort later on? Okay. Rob, what do you mean by pending and closed users? Let me unmute you. What do you mean by pending and closed activities for users? You're muted. Harrison, you there? Luke? Well, then don't ask us. Julie asked, we're talking about knowledge articles in a different session. Yes, Julie, I am, because we have to, in order to talk about knowledge articles, we have to get into the interactive service hub. Which I don't know where it is anymore. Is that our setting? Service? Settings? What's there? Anyway, yeah, that's tied into the interactive service hub, and so we have to talk about all that together, because that's the only place to find knowledge articles, so we have to kind of roll it all into one. But yeah, I definitely will. Next, I think it's two webinars away, I think. Okay, anybody have any other questions or suggestions or anything like that? Okay. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time today, and you guys have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later.